All right, I'm gonna get back to a topic that I talked about a while ago. I have a different way to illustrate a problem with Gitflow, and specifically with overbranching. I found a pretty good article sort of explaining Gitflow. If you're completely unfamiliar, it might be helpful. After I got through this, I stumbled across this diagram, and I think this diagram is part of the problem that gets masked. So what I'm going to do is try and illustrate a version of this diagram in sort of a different way of looking at it to help folks understand why this sort of overbranching model can be problematic. And to do that, I'm going to jump into my quest here and try and illustrate it. All right, so this is probably going to be goofed up because I just stood up, but let's give it a whirl. So here we have that workflow diagram, and it, it really makes sense if there's only one feature at a time, right? And I'll just talk through sort of why did that get to go there? Okay, so in general, folks tend to, and this is actually called main now typically, but there's master, and generally it's the intent is that this is sort of a clean branch, right? There's no weird commits in the middle or work that's in progress. And you have release, which is what code is actually getting released. Um, and I have a problem with that because I think release and deploy are two different things, but I'm going to use the conventions in this diagram. Develop is sort of the unstable mainline. Um, and in most illustrations, they've got feature down here, right? And so if this is your starting point, your initial commit, right, you branch into develop. And then if you're going to build something, you branch into feature. You do your commits. Each of these little balls represents commit. And then you merge it back to develop, right? And then it gets merged into release. And then release gets merged into master. Hotfix, which is used, and they introduced that concept here, that isn't always in there. You've got a problem in production, right? Uh, you branch from the main line, which is what's supposed to be running in production, make your commit, and then merge it into develop, and then you merge it back to release for the next release, which when it's put into production, it'll get merged in up here. If you're someone in the code, this is sort of the mental model you've got to contend with, right? You've got to deal with divergent sort of code changes that could conflict, and the real problem is, let's use this guy as an example here. So he diverged at the same point here. There's some changes, and often what'll happen is something like, what's the color I'm not using? I'll use this, got red. I'll use this orange color here. This commit and this commit have a conflict. They edited the same file, the same line, something's a problem. Worse yet, you get in a situation where like this one also has a conflict with, so these three are in conflict. The longer time goes on these independent branches, generally the larger and larger the resolution of that conflict gets. And if you look at how the data flows in between all these branches, it's really hard to know when you're actually going to get to see that conflict. So in this example, we don't actually see the conflict until here. And by the way, this code is already in this model been moved to production. So now changing it, you're effectively changing a feature that's done when you merge this in. And some of that's unavoidable, but I would argue what many folks don't do is they don't merge changes back frequently enough to detect things like that. Because if you're merging back, right, from develop on a regular basis, once he commits this, once this conflicted code is uh, is committed, the next time this person merges back, actually I'll go here, they're going to detect the commit here, right, which is well in advance of here. So I guess the what I'm saying is, if you're going to use this model, and I'm not necessarily endorsing it, all of your feature developers should be merging back on a regular basis from develop. And a lot of tutorials, like it's not even represented here, that while you're working, you should be merging back changes from other places and then reintegrate at the end. It should be a clean merge, frankly. As a matter of fact, another approach, if it's a single developer here, they could be rebasing and then it looks like a single commit when it goes in. Because the other reality is, even on one feature, if you have, well, I don't want to use a circle. I'll use a cylinder to represent developers, I guess. You may have 3 developers, and quite frankly, they effectively have their own branch, right? Because they have their local branch. So they may, they may in fact, ideally this wouldn't be the case, but even on one feature, you may have developers going in divergent directions too. And this diagram, while it looks simple, it doesn't represent what developers actually have to contend with, which is, feature A has its own set of people going off in different directions trying to do stuff. And then you multiply that by the number of other features and number of people on the teams working on those features. And then you look at all the merging that has to happen here. Often there's a person or set of people who all they do is look at merges coming in and out, which, again, if they're very tiny patches, probably not a big deal, especially if your goal is to sort of maintain stability in the code base. But if you're trying to move fast and create new things, and it's a shared code base and you have a lot of developers, this model can get old pretty quickly, and as we can see, pretty complicated. Anyway, hope that's a maybe a gentle introduction to the complexities of over-branching, or some of these models like Gitflow that really encourage a lot of branching. Again, my contention is for larger teams that are moving fast, trying to release quickly, this is overkill. For very small teams, it's overkill. If you're moving slow and you have a lot of changes coming in, but you have like someone's job is to manage which patches are coming in and reject them or enable them, this probably makes a lot more sense. Again, something like the Linux kernel or a large sort of open source project. As a matter of fact, that's sort of what Git was designed for. So it makes a lot of sense. Most corporate development, even startups and SaaS products, this this might not be your model, and there's more than one. This one pops up a lot, and I have to explain why it's not as simple as this diagram. So hopefully this helps illustrate that a little better.